Hi guys, so today I wanted to do a recommendations video. I have read quite a few memoirs over the past couple of years and I've really enjoyed a lot of them. So I thought I would start recommending to you some of these memoirs, and I actually thought I would fit them all in one video, but then when I had a look at how many memoirs I had really enjoyed, I have close to 10 and I didn't want to make such a long video, so I'm going to be splitting it up, and this is going to be the first part of my memoir recommendations. I'm going to discuss 5 memoirs with you guys today. They're all quite different. Some of them I haven't read in a while, but they still really stick with me, and I would heartily recommend them to anyone who really enjoys memoirs. So the first memoir I want to recommend is A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid. So I think a lot of people know Jamaica Kincaid mostly for her fiction. I personally have not read her fiction, but a couple of years ago, so actually in my last year of university, I took a class on post-colonial literature, and this was one of the books that we read. Basically, it's kind of a memoir, but she's actually addressing you as the reader as a tourist. And basically, she's looking at the effect of colonization, tourism, all of these things on Antigua, which is her native country. And basically, throughout this book, she's talking to you, she's really implicating you in the story, and she starts off the book, actually, let me read you the first line. It says, "If you go to Antigua as a tourist, this is what you will see." So she's really addressing you as a tourist and the effect of tourism on Antigua, but you get a lot of the history of Antigua as well. The history of colonialism, how when you look at a certain building you may see something, but in reality you don't see the horrors behind it. It's a really eye-opening book, and I think it's important because a lot of us are tourists. We go to places, we go there for the beaches, we don't necessarily look at the history of the places we visit, or maybe you do, and if you do, that's great, but not a lot of people do that. So it's really interesting to get the perspective of someone who has seen tourism and maybe doesn't have the most positive look on tourism. So I highly recommend this if you're interested in post-colonial studies. If you've read any other of her books, I think you'd probably like it. It's a very, very short read, but a very gripping read, so I highly recommend it if you're interested. So the next book I'd like to recommend is Scum of the Earth by Arthur Koestler. And this is a book, this is a memoir that was published in 1941, actually quite soon after the events take place. This is about Arthur Koestler, who was living in Paris at the time of the Nazi invasion. It takes place about around 1940, and it basically tells of how he was interned by the French police for being an alien, for being against French values. He was a notable anti-fascist person, but he was still kind of caught up in this and this era of the abolishment of free speech, and he had quite a lot to say about society, and this is really about how French society changed during the war and how basically French society crumbled. And it's interesting because the title Scum of the Earth can mean two things. Either he's talking about the French police and the disintegration of the state, or he's talking about himself and what he was considered under this time period in France. And it's a very interesting, very thought-provoking book. It talks a lot about basically fascism, communism. It talks about his time in political movements, and overall I think if you're interested in the Second World War and if you're interested in France during the Second World War, I would highly recommend this book. I would say if you're not really interested in those topics, you might not enjoy it as much. It can be a bit dry in places, but I thought it was really, really interesting as someone who really enjoys reading about the Second World War. So the next book is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. So this was the first book I've read by Joan Didion. I have read several other books of hers since then, but I think this is actually kind of a love it or hate it book. I've seen a lot of people really love this book, and I really love it, but some people do have some problems with it, which I totally understand. Basically, it's about Joan Didion's husband John when he dies and the aftermath of his death, but also looking back on their life together, and also it deals with her daughter Quintana's sickness and how she got sick after her father died. So it's looking at a lot of really powerful events in Joan Didion's life, and she looks back on her early life with her husband and her daughter, and she's also looking at the present and a bit at the future. And it's just a very beautifully written, very moving, raw book. I think that's the only way I can describe it. There's so much emotion in this book, and this is one of those books that when I was reading it I felt really sad for Joan Didion, and it really made me interested in her life. At the same time, some people have found it a bit boring in places. Some people don't like that she really does discuss medical terminology a lot. She brings up a lot of medical information, and that might not be interesting to everyone. I didn't really mind that. Actually don't even remember thinking that was a problem, but I think that if that kind of detracts from the story, it might bother you. But I would still recommend picking it up because I think it's a worthwhile read, and it's a really interesting look on how Joan Didion coped with all of these situations that were being thrown at her. The next book I wanted to mention is Bone Black by Bell Hooks. This is actually the only book on this list that I've read this year, and it is actually one of my favorites on this list. It's basically a collection of memories, as it says in the title, Memories of Girlhood. It talks about specific events that took place in Bell Hooks' young life, when she was a child, when she was a young woman, and it really looks at how she grew up, how she felt growing up as a young black woman in the South, and all of the horrible situations she was put in and how she had to deal with everything. And it looks a lot at her family life as well, which I thought was really interesting, her relationship with her mother, which was really, really interesting to look at, and the fights they had and the tension within her childhood basically. There's a lot of look at color. For example, her mother always wants her to wear pink or to like the color pink, but Bell Hooks felt a lot more comfortable with the color black, and I think that's why the title is Bone Black. There's a lot of references to color in this book, and I feel like this would be a really interesting book to study at the university level. I'm not sure if any classes do this, but I would think this would be a really interesting book to read at the university level, because I'm sure there's so much I didn't pick up on because I wasn't really discussing with the group. And overall, this is a really good book because it's just so raw. Like with The Year of Magical Thinking, she doesn't really stop herself from saying things that might be very, very, very personal. And I haven't heard that much spoken about this book, but it's definitely a worthwhile read if you like coming of age stories, if you like stories about people who are dealing with adversity in their communities, and if you like Bell Hooks, obviously you will definitely like this book. The final book I'd like to share with you guys today is Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, and this is about George Orwell's time in Barcelona during the Spanish Civil War. It looks at his time fighting alongside the Marxist Party in the International Brigades, which were fighting against Franco and the fascists. And he looks at basically how things were on the ground in Spain during this time period. And it's not a subject I'd learned much about before picking up this book, but when I picked up this book, it really sparked my interest, and I actually read a bit more about it in a university class I did when I read this, and I really, really enjoyed this. I think that if you enjoy books about war, like if you enjoy Scum of the Earth, if Scum of the Earth interests you, I would definitely recommend picking up Homage to Catalonia. And I would say that it's something that a lot of people would find really interesting. And if you already enjoy George Orwell, I would say branching out into his nonfiction is a really good thing to do, because his nonfiction is just really, really good. So I highly recommend this for someone who's interested in George Orwell, or someone who likes reading about war or war reporting. Really good and definitely recommended. So those are the memoirs that I wanted to mention in this video. I do have a lot of other memoir recommendations I'd like to share with you guys in a future video. If you guys have any memoirs you'd like to recommend with me, you can comment those in the comment box below. I'd really enjoy learning about what memoirs really spoke to you, and especially if they're memoirs that are a bit underrated or underhyped. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys soon.